Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off because today I'll be reviewing and paging through the Old School Essentials Classic Fantasy Rules Tome from Necrotic Gnome. Is this a must have for any gamer looking to experience the RPG old school renaissance? Or is this simply yet another in an unending series of Dungeons and Dragons BX retro clones? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts about the Old School Essentials Classic Fantasy Rules Tome from Necrotic Gnome. It's written by Gavin Norman with artwork provided by Mustafa Bakir, Michael Clark, Thomas Denmark, Per Graydon, Paulina Henanimi, Mike Hill, John Hodgson, Tom Killian, Kyle Latino, Emma Lizowski, Jethro Lentil, Mark Lyons, Sam Mamelli, Alex Mayo, Bradley McDevitt, Penny Melgarejo, Peter Mullen, and Yogo Nguai. And I know I have mispronounced at least half of those people's names. My apologies. This 296-page A5 size hardcover is available here in the U.S., including the PDF from Exalted Funeral for $40, or you can grab the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $20. Keep in mind, the Gaming Gang is affiliated with the One Bookshelf sites. So if you are going to visit DriveThruRPG, please stop by thegaminggang.com first. Click on one of our banner ads. That way, if you do happen to make a purchase, I get a very small portion of that sale. But all those nickels, dimes, and quarters really do add up and help keep thegaminggang.com around. That said, swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Old School Essentials Classic Fantasy. Few things before we dive on in. First off, the fine folks over at Necrotic Gnome and Exalted Funeral were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share my thoughts about this book with you. And these days, it's important that you know that. Also, I'm going to say picture in picture up here. So I'll be cutting off the upper left portion of the book as we take a peek through. I did a fairly extensive page through on one of the live episodes of the Gaming Gang Dispatch. So if you want to get an even closer look at what's in this book, by all means, you might want to check that out. All right, let's jump on in. So one of the first things that I noticed that I thought was pretty cool is on the inside of the cover, both front and back, we have what breaks down to be our Game Master's screen. I thought that was cool. Definitely like that. Pop on in here. So first off, is this a retro clone? No, actually it is not a retro clone. This is not a fantasy heartbreaker. This is not someone's take on the basic and expert Dungeons and Dragons rules. These are the basic and expert Dungeons and Dragons rules. Cleaned up, presented for a modern audience. So we don't have changes to mechanics or anything like that. We do have some optional rules that are introduced, such as the ascending armor class, which honestly I would utilize because it's just much more intuitive. People are familiar with that if they have played other editions of D&D or any D20 sort of role-playing game. So there is that. But this is basic expert. And when I say basic expert, I mean the Tom Moldvay and Zeb Cook basic expert box sets, not the later basic expert, and so on, those releases that came out from TSR. So we're going to find all the information that we need for you to run this game. It's all contained in this book. So we've got our info about creating player characters, and we've got 7 different classes. Keeping in mind, race is class in BX. So we've got the dwarf, the halfling, as well as the elf. Those are classes available to the players, as well as clerics, fighters, thieves, and magic users. Everything is provided just right there for you. And one of the aspects I really dig about the presentation is everything is presented in nice, short chunks that are very easy for you to digest. One of the knocks on earlier role-playing games from the Golden Age is that they aren't the most intuitive books around. Well, all gaming was like that. Board games, war games, all of it, not very intuitive as far as the presentation. Did we figure things out? Of course we did. But there were errors and inconsistencies in the basic and expert sets. All of that has been cleaned up. But as I mentioned, this is not a retro clone. Things have not been radically redesigned or changed or anything like that. We have a lot of artwork throughout. It's original artwork, so I appreciate that. We're not looking at a bunch of royalty-free clip art. Some of the artwork's a bit of a mixed bag, but let's be honest, the AD&D books, things like that, that artwork was kind of a mixed bag sometimes too. We had some really great artwork, and then we had some, I guess it's all right, artwork. So we've got all the player-facing information. See, like, I think that's pretty cool artwork there. And then I actually like a lot of the line artwork that's contained in this tome as well. But as I mentioned, you've got everything you need at your fingertips in this book. Originally, this was a set of hardcover smaller booklets that came in a box set. It has been out of print for quite some time. I know a lot of people appreciate the smaller books because they're broken up into like the player rules and treasure and monsters. And some folks find that much easier to utilize at the game table. I got to say, this book is really well presented to use at the game table as well. If you are a big fan of having the separate books, there is a Kickstarter on the horizon. It is actually going to hit later on this month for both the box set for Classic Fantasy as well as the box set for Advanced Fantasy. And of course, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com. I will have news about that as well. If you want to learn more about the history of the old school Essentials creation, and as well as that upcoming Kickstarter, you can always check out my interview that I did with Gavin Norman. We talk about all of that stuff. Kind of zipping on through here a bit. We've got magic. We've got all the magic spells. Once again, I see this time and time again. One of the aspects I like about old school presentations is that it's not just tons and tons of fluff. It's usually presented pretty much matter-of-factly, and it's like, here's what you need to know. And I like that. And I say it all the time, especially with Magic, because a game master has enough things that they need to have bouncing around in their head as they're running a game. Do they really need to have every aspect of magic spells memorized when each magic spell is 1 or 2 pages long? No. Can they do it? No, they can't. I don't know anybody who can. So we've got all the different spells. They are broken up by level as well as type of caster. We've got, I want to say, I think there's about 150 spells. Maybe that's a little high. I know it's over 100. So we get some of the core rules here as well. And once again, we get some optional rules like encumbrance. Talking about time, weight, and movement. One huge aspect of the OSR is time, tracking resources. Part of an old school dungeon delve is resource management. And that is something that is mainly lost in the modern design philosophies. But once again, we get all of this info, just nice, easily read chunks. This is a really good book to sit down with and just read in spurts. Although I gotta be honest, I've read this all in one sitting, but still, this is the kind of book that really works well just in spurts. Just kick back and go, oh, you know what? I'm going to read all about combat, because we're not talking 40 pages. We're just talking a handful of pages. We do have the old attack matrix with THAC0. If you want to use THAC0, once again, that is an optional rule. I would just go Ascending Armor class. It's just me. And it's pretty easy to port old adventures as far as Ascending Armor class, as opposed to the armor classes from like AD&D. Another aspect of old school essentials that you want to keep in mind, and segueing right from the adventure scenarios page here, there are thousands and thousands of old school adventures that can easily be run with these rules with either no or minimal changes to be made to those adventures. That is a huge selling point of old school essentials. And of course, Necrotic Gnome has their own lineup of adventures that have been very well reviewed. We've got some reviews coming for some as well, so stay tuned for that. I have to be honest, those were provided in PDF, so my correspondents are actually reviewing those. Then we got a breakdown of like experience points, advancing in levels, and one aspect of the modern game that's kind of hand-waved now, especially in D&D and second edition Pathfinder, are experience points, where that was a huge aspect of old school role-playing games. And the whole thing was you were getting experience points more for your treasure than anything else. You didn't want to fight every monster you came across. Yes, granted, you got a little bit of experience for it, but the big experience is from treasure. And once again, the old school design mechanic is resource management. So when you're screwing around and you're fighting wandering monsters and having to fight everything you come across, you're going to run out of those resources very quickly and be in trouble. So we also have, I believe, over 200 monsters in here. And we do have the old school presentation of the stat block. It's right to the point. We don't have artwork for each and every entry, but we've got plenty of artwork throughout. And another thing I like about that old school design is we're getting everything we need to know about the creature or monster or what have you, all in a small stat block telling you, okay, here we got the stats and here are the things that this creature or monster, what have you, is capable of doing. What makes this different than anything else? And I like that. Granted, you're not getting a bunch of information about the tactics the creature is going to use, but of course, some of that is deduced from their stat block as well. If you're kind of up in the air on that and you're not familiar how to kind of get an idea of how creatures react, especially intelligent creatures, I would definitely recommend checking out The Monsters Know What They're Doing. It's for one, it's a blog, but it's also now it's 2 books that are available that are pretty interesting. I don't necessarily agree with everything in them. But and of course they are kind of aimed towards fifth edition. Shouldn't say kind of, they are. But you can get a lot of really good tips for being a game master and utilizing the various different races and creatures and monsters and so on. I do like this elephant artwork. Like I said, some of the line artwork is really cool. All in all, the artwork's a little bit of a mixed bag. So we got the bestiary there. Once again, got a lot of creatures. Then we get some encounter tables for use for the game master. Then we get into NPCs and treasures. And as far as treasures go, I believe we've got over 150 unique magic items in here as well. So another aspect of the old school that I'm a big fan of is that some of the treasures tend to have kind of a dual edged sword vibe to them. So, you might have something useful and something that you don't like so much about the magic item. So that is pretty much how we're going to wrap up the book here. We get a little bit of some psionics and abilities right at the end. And we got our indexes. We've got our open game license. And then once again, our game master screen portion back here as well. So that is Old School Essentials Classic Fantasy. This is the rules tome. Let's swing on over to the other camera. I will provide some final thoughts as well as a review score. I really dig Old School Essentials Classic Fantasy. I understand a lot of people like the smaller hardcover booklets that came in the box set because they feel it's easier to use at the table. I think this is also very, very easy to utilize at the table as well. Especially you got a couple of bookmarks, very handy for you. I have to be honest, running something like this, I would probably steer towards the advanced fantasy tomes, the player's tome and referee's tome. But that's because I come from an advanced Dungeons and Dragons background in high school. We never played basic or expert. We played AD&D. That was basically what we played. So I really love this book. I'm just saying that I would probably steer myself personally towards advanced fantasy. And I have reviews of those two books on the very near horizon. But that doesn't take anything away from classic fantasy. Everything you need to run basic and expert Dungeons and Dragons adventures is right here in this book. You can easily also port over thousands upon thousands of old school adventures, be it from Necrotic Gnome, which are actually published for Old School Essentials, or TSR, or Judges Guild. All of that stuff can easily be run with just this one rules tome. Love it. Tons of monsters, tons of treasure. You've got the 7 classes with race as class as well, which is expanded upon in some of the Carcass Crawler magazines, which are also from Necrotic Gnome. They give you new classes as well. And of course, there's always advanced fantasy with more classes and with race separate. So you've got that also to keep in mind. But man, this is so well done. This is really, really well done. Only thing that, and I mean, I don't have an issue with it, but I know other people do. There are no examples of play like there were in the original box sets. And there's no big section on what is a role playing game? How do you run a role playing game? So that is not present in this. And this is really aimed at someone who has experience with role playing games. Doesn't necessarily have to be Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't have to be a D20 system, but somebody should have a little bit of experience with RPGs before they dive on in. That said, there's some advice in the book saying, hey, if you don't know what a role playing game is, and you have friends who play role playing games, ask them if you can play. And if you don't have that situation available to you, go online, watch some videos, some actual play. It's not like there aren't millions of them out there. So that is the only kind of little bit of a knock, and it's really not a knock. It's just this really is aimed at people who have some experience with RPGs. On a scale of 0 to 10, I give Old School Essentials, Classic Fantasy Rules Tome, the rarefied 10 out of 10. I think it is that good. I think if you have any interest in the old school Renaissance, you should have a copy of this book, either the physical book or PDF, your choice. But I really do think it should be part of your collection. Also, should point out there is a Player's Rules tome that is available. It is $20 over at Exalted Funeral, or you can get the PDF for $10 if you want your players to have access to all the BX rules that are aimed at the players. All right, that is it for this time out. If you happen to like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also let you know when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Central right here on YouTube. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for taking time out to watch this video. And here's hoping that each and every one of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang. See you next time. Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel by clicking right here. Check out the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch, or find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks for watching.